Tonight, we'll step slowly into the mystery of Lapland's sacred stones, sieidi, where noaidis acted as mediators between people and the spirit world, sometimes with the rhythmic pulse of a drum or the soft sound of a fadno flute. Families and clans trusted these stones as part of the fragile balance of survival, leaving gifts to maintain harmony with forces they could not see. Later, we'll touch on what archaeology has uncovered at some of these sites, adding another quiet layer to the story. For now, take a slow breath and wonder. Are these simply stones or silent witnesses to something much greater? In the quiet stillness of Lapland, there are places where stone and silence seem to meet in ways that invite attention. Among snow-covered forests, river crossings, and high ridges, certain rocks stood apart. Their shapes could be strange or striking, their placement unusual, as though nature had set them aside for a purpose. These were called sieidi, and they carried meaning that reached far beyond the ordinary. Sieidi could be natural stones of unusual shape, or, more rarely, wooden figures. They were often found near lakes, on riverbanks, or high on mountain slopes, where the land itself seemed to hold its breath. To those who lived here, these stones were not mere rock. They were seen as chosen by the land, or as places where spirits lingered close to the human world. Each stood as a quiet link in the fragile web of survival, at a time when storms, hunger, and chance could overturn a season's hope overnight. The sieidi acted as intermediaries, connecting families and clans to powers bound to animals, waters, and shifting weather. This bond was not built with words, but with offerings. People lit fires and placed gifts, a cut of meat, a fish laid carefully on stone, coins pressed into cracks, or bones from a hunt. The act carried weight, not for decoration, but for exchange, a way of keeping balance with what was unseen. Archaeologists have found animal bones, and traces of food remains at these stones, reminders that the rituals were not only told in stories, but practiced in daily life. The offerings themselves reflected intent. A large fish, or even a reindeer, showed generosity and trust, a sign of deep gratitude or a plea for greater favor. Smaller gifts carried their own message, often shaped by scarcity or cautious hope. In every case, the gift mirrored the needs and anxieties of the giver, turning the stone into a surface where human life and uncertainty were laid bare. Reciprocity stood at the heart of this relationship. Families often promised offerings before hunts or journeys. When the trip succeeded, the offering was paid. If not, the sieidi could be seen as having withheld its favor. In this way, the bond was not passive but conditional, a reminder that the relationship moved in both directions. Over time, particular stones became linked to certain families. Stories of ancestors' visits traveled through generations, and the stone itself became part of a clan's history, not just a place, but an inheritance of memory and duty. While the sieidi stood in silence, they never existed in isolation. Rituals turned them into meeting points of the seen and unseen. And when those ceremonies deepened into moments of guidance or protection, someone was needed to give that silence a voice. It was in these moments that another figure stepped forward, the noaidi, with the steady beat of a drum, ready to open paths not visible to ordinary eyes. Picture the steady sound of a drum echoing through a frozen night. The beat lingers in the air, simple yet insistent, and those who hear it believe they are listening to more than music. Each strike carries intention, shaping a space where ordinary sight ends and another pathway begins. This was the realm of the noaidi, the Sami shaman, whose role reached beyond ritual. Noaidis served as mediators to Saivo, the underworld or spirit realm, typically using a Sami drum and sometimes a fadno flute during ceremonies. The noaidi guided the community not through force or wealth, but through knowledge both practical and hidden. People sought them out when disease spread, when hunts faltered, or when disputes fractured trust among neighbors. Their work tied survival to meaning, anchoring life's uncertainty within a wider balance of land, spirits, and ancestors. In this way, they were more than priests or healers. They were bridges between the living world and unseen forces that shaped it. Whether the spirits themselves drew near or the ceremony strengthened shared belief, the drum functioned as a doorway. What is known is that the drum was far more than an instrument. Each one was carefully prepared and often marked with symbols, its surface treated with reverence. When the beater struck it, the rhythm was regarded as a path or map for the noaidi, guiding them into spaces beyond the ordinary. With eyes closed, listeners might feel as though they too were being drawn along those invisible trails. The rituals also carried a layered soundscape. The deep drumbeat formed the ground, while the fadno flute, made from the stalk of an angelica plant, added fragile tones, an airy counterpoint that softened and widened the atmosphere. It was this weaving of rhythm, melody, and intention that held the people together in shared presence. Ceremonies often took place at or near a sieidi, where gifts already rested on stone. Firelight and drifting smoke merged with the pulse of the drum, while the gathered clan lent its attention and quiet trust. The noaidi did not stand apart from the group, but within it, using sound to shift the boundaries of what they felt was possible. For those present, prayer and performance were not separate things. They were one unfolding moment. Later, Christian missionaries often condemned and destroyed drums and persecuted noaidis, forcing some practices underground. Drums were burned, ceremonies broken apart, and the noaidi's place within the community was threatened. Yet memory held on. Even when the drums themselves were silenced, stories continued to pass from one generation to the next, carrying echoes of the journeys once taken through rhythm and voice. More than mystics, noaidis were protectors of the body and spirit, the household and the wilderness alike. With every beat of the drum, they thinned the line between seen and unseen, leaving an impression that lingered long after the sound faded. And in the quiet that followed, the land itself sometimes seemed to answer, drawing forth tales of lights that shimmered, stones that glowed, and paths where travelers stepped into mystery and did not return. Stories that linger around these sacred places often speak of unusual sights and quiet mysteries. Folklore remembers faint lights appearing near the stones, drifting in the night like slow flames across snow. Some tales describe a rock itself seeming to glow softly, as if it carried a hidden pulse. To those who passed these places after nightfall, such moments were not dismissed as tricks of the eye. They were taken as reminders that the land could hold voices beyond ordinary hearing. Old accounts tell of travelers struck by strange experiences not far from a sieidi. Some spoke of whispers borne on the wind, difficult to place and difficult to ignore. Others recalled walking into a clearing and feeling the air grow heavier, as though the space itself carried a presence. Tales describe wanderers who returned with strange visions they struggled to explain, or who never came back at all. Such stories acted less as reports of events than as cautionary tales, reminders of the boundary between ordinary paths and places thought to touch the unseen. It is possible to imagine natural causes shaping these moments. Natural phenomena, northern lights, shifting reflections on ice and water, or unusual night shadows, could easily create sights that inspired stories. Yet those who lived near the sieidi were less concerned with explaining and more concerned with responding. What mattered was respect, careful attention, and the knowledge that these stones marked points of contact with powers larger than human control. Some folklore brings other figures into these landscapes. Stalo are often described as large, dangerous figures in Sami stories, sometimes monstrous, sometimes used as cautionary figures to warn children or explain dangerous places. In narratives tied to sieidi, their presence added unease to an already sacred setting. Accounts even describe certain lakes as holding Stalo burials beneath their surfaces, with odd reflections or unnatural colors taken as evidence of their influence. These details deepen the conviction that such sites were never ordinary, and that moving through them required humility. For those making journeys across valleys or forests where a sieidi stood, silence itself could take on meaning. To travel with quiet steps, to avoid careless talk, and to approach with offerings or restraint was part of meeting the sacred without disturbance. Passing a sieidi thoughtlessly was discouraged, for these were not only features of land, but thresholds demanding awareness. The northern sky also added its own mysteries. In Finnish tradition, the northern lights are sometimes called revontulet, or foxfires, a story imagining sparks sweeping from a fox's tail as it ran across snowy hills. When aurora colors spread out above a sieidi, it seemed to fold the earth and sky together, leaving people with the feeling that the living land and the spirit world were part of one shared presence. Taken together, these stories do more than describe unusual sights. They show how the sieidi became markers of deep connection, places where people knew they must walk carefully and listen closely. And as we turn from these echoes in legend, we are reminded that the stones themselves were never thought of as silent, but as quiet companions in the ongoing story between land and those who dwell upon it. In closing, when we see these weathered stones today, we might imagine the faces and hands that once approached them, hoping to preserve survival through respect and careful trust. These places still linger in memory because stories continue to keep them alive, even when the rituals themselves have faded. If you enjoyed this gentle exploration of an old mystery, consider subscribing for more calm stories told slowly. Take a deep breath now and let the quiet stay with you as you rest.